Old Believers, made up mostly of great Russians, emigrated to the very fringes of the Russian Empire to escape the real or imagined persecutions leveled against them by the state and or the church. The Old Believers, who made up the founders of the Church of the Nativity of Christ in Erie, came from those priestless Old Believers who emigrated to the shores of the northern lakes, and thus became known as the Pomorce, or shore dwellers. At some point, they then emigrated to an area now in Poland, then a part of Russia's western outskirts known as Suwałki Siężne. At about the end of the third quarter of the 19th century, up until the mid-teens of this century, many of these Old Believers came to America. Most of them first made their residences in the coal mining town south of Pittsburgh, where work was readily available even for those who could not speak English. Some came immediately to Erie, where work on the ore and pulp docks was also available, regardless of language or ethnic considerations. These ore and pulp docks, now closed since both the steel and paper industries have found other means of bringing their raw materials to their factories, were located on the Erie Bayfront directly north of the church. By the turn of the 20th century, scores of Old Believers had located in the several block area which surrounds the location of the church. They prayed and conducted services for a number of years in a house or houses in which rooms were set aside as chapels for the faithful. In 1916, the Old Believers embarked on the task of building the first church. They raised money by assessing each family a small donation and by visiting the Old Believers in the coal mining towns to solicit further funds. On the Feast of the Dormition of the Mother of God in 1919, the church was dedicated, and in 1923, the first full-time nastavnik, Father Nikon Pansarev, assumed the role of the spiritual leader of this Old Believer community. During the years of Father Nikon's leadership, the traditions of the Old Believers remained fairly intact in spite of the ever-growing temptation to Americanize. While the children of the original immigrants spoke English on the streets or in school, Russian was still spoken for the most part at home. Russian singing, storytelling, and dancing were all a part of the community's social fabric. And in the church, the strict discipline and order that characterized Old Believers in general was the rule. Men remained unshaven or were excluded from active participation in the divine services. Children were expected to be present in church and to stand still. If they didn't, a choice word or an outright physical reminder was always a possibility. Fasting rules were followed. Penances given then still are a topic of conversation. Marriage outside the church resulted in exclusion from the church. In spite of all the rigorous obedience to the Old Believer ways, however, Americanization was inevitably occurring, and World War II was the straw that broke the camel's back in the attempt to continue this pseudo-isolated lifestyle of the Old Believer community. Now men went to war. They shaved. They had no church in which to pray. They were unable to follow the fasts. They dated non-Old Believers and generally learned how to live a lifestyle very different than their ancestors. And so it was also with the wives and young ladies left at home. Even the Old Believers experienced a Rosie the Riveter phenomenon. Working in the shop meant missing feast day services, not taking the children to church as often as before, and befriending more non-Old Believers whose ways were different and often attractive. Thus, by the end of the World War II, life was different in the Old Believer community. Father Nikon's death in 1946 was attributed to a number of factors. Some claim he died of a broken heart. Certainly he felt the pain of seeing that his rigorous insistence on following the old ways to the letter of the law was doomed in the post-war era. He was followed by Albert Iakinf Yokov, who served the parish well in this transitional period. Father Iakinf was the rector from Father Nikon's death in 1946 until 1952. In November of 1952, when Father Vladimir Smolikov assumed the position of nastavnik of the parish, things appeared unbelievably prosperous. These were the years the baby boomers were entering school. Baptisms were conducted almost weekly. Church school and Sunday school attendance was literally booming. Scores of children were present at Saturday Vespers, but many mothers had not left their jobs after the war. Forgotten fasting rules were not easily remembered. Saturday night at the CYS Club, the Moose Club, or any of the clubs was the reward for the war years. Marriages outside the church, while still frowned upon, were increasing and becoming even more accepted. Even children born of such marriages being baptized as Catholics or Protestants became tolerated. Church services were attended, but only if they did not interfere with the employment or social activities of the members of the community. The Russian language was spoken by the babas and dedas, but the moms and dads were limited to a Russian-English mixture when attempting to speak Russian, and the children spoke no Russian at all. On Saturday nights, the fortunes of the East High or Tech football teams became more important than what tone was being sung in the hymns for Sunday's divine services. Thus, by the early 70s, when Father Vladimir was seeking to retire, he was keeping his finger in the crack trying to stop the floodwaters of American secularism and materialism from drowning the community. When Father Vladimir decided to retire from the position of rector in order to move back to Millville, New Jersey, where he had lived before coming to Erie, Lawrence Evanoff was chosen as the fourth full-time nastavnik and rector of the parish. Father Lawrence served in that capacity from July 1973 until December 1975. His resignation created a crisis in the parish in that no candidate was found willing to accept the position of nastavnik and rector. The parish on numerous occasions had asked Pimen Simon to accept this position. Pimen had been active in parish life from childhood and had attended a summer seminary program taught by Father Vladimir in the 1960s. Pimen remained active in parish life during his years in college and in law school, and had remained active even while practicing law in the Knox law firm in Erie. After refusing to accept the nastavnik position on numerous occasions, Pimen and his wife finally relented because of their realization that the parish was going to die if a leader could not be found. Pimen agreed to be blessed as a nastavnik on November 21st, November 8th by the Julian calendar of 1976, the feast of Archangel Michael, and ceased practicing law at the end of October 1976. In the late 1970s, the issues of how to save the community became a source of controversy and divisiveness in the parish. Had the time come for the use of English in the church? Some thought this was the only answer. Others were horrified and angered at the thought of hearing the services in any language other than the Old Church Slavonic. But in the midst of this searching for direction, an event happened that temporarily pulled everyone together. On Labor Day, September 6, 1977, a fire began in the nave of the church. Charcoal which had fallen out of the incense was placed in the trash can of old used charcoal. After everyone had left the church that morning, the hot charcoal ignited the used charcoal and spread quickly out of the trash can. Soon the entire nave was engulfed in flames. Miraculously, only one service book was destroyed, but a number of icons, including several very old icons, were lost. The church services had to be moved to the old neighborhood house, which became the temporary church until Thanksgiving morning of 1977. On Thanksgiving morning of that same year, all members of the parish rejoiced at the return to the church. A service to our Savior was conducted in the renovated church, which had a new coat of plaster, new windows, and all the woodwork sanded and restained. Otherwise, the church looked the same as before. Now the parish once again turned to the issues of which direction was proper and necessary. While the building of the community center and funeral parlor in 1978 again helped to mask some of the underlying dissension within the community, by the beginning of 1979, when English was introduced on a very limited basis in the liturgical services, the parish was beginning to divide into two camps. And on the Sunday of the Prodigal Son in 1980, when English was introduced into all services except Saturday Vespers every other week, the divisiveness began to come close to a boiling point. Finally, in 1982, with the inception of the study committee to investigate the possible return to the full old rite of the Russian Orthodox Church, the inevitable division occurred. At first, a small group of parishioners stopped coming to the church. After the historic vote of January 9, 1983, at which the parish voted by well over a two-thirds majority to restore the full rites by accepting the hierarchical authority of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, the division was completed, with about 20% of the parish families leaving and founding the Holy Trinity Old Believer Church, which still remains a priestless Old Believer community. On July 24th, July 11th by the Julian calendar, 1983, the present nastavnik, Father Pimen Simon, was ordained to the priesthood by Archbishop Loris. Akintin Alex was ordained to the diaconate by Bishop Alippi, and the church was consecrated by Archbishop Loris, who celebrated the first liturgy ever served in the Church of the Nativity. During the Dormition Fast of 1983, Father Pimen chrismated approximately 500 parishioners, who all partook of Holy Communion for the first time in their lives, on the feast of the Dormition of the Mother of God, on Sunday, August 28th, August 15th by the Julian calendar, 1983. In 1984, Father Theodore Yurevich, a world-famous iconographer, joined the parish as its assistant priest. Father Theodore continued the beautification of the church by painting many icons which added to the feeling of fullness of the church and the Orthodox liturgical rite. Late in 1985, the parish approved the request of Father Pimen to sponsor the 8th Annual Orthodox Conference in Erie. This event would bring bishops, priests, and hundreds of Orthodox faithful to the Erie parish for a week-long conference, beginning on July 27, 1986, and ending on August 7th. By Sunday, July 20th, 4 bishops, 25 priests, and 3 deacons, along with over 450 lay people, had registered for the conference. The church was newly painted, the floors were revarnished, the exterior brick was chemically cleaned, the basement and lower stairs were paneled and also cleaned. On the afternoon of July 22, 1986, last-minute preparations were being made for the conference. Donald Novichenko and his son-in-law were cleaning the carpets when Donald's daughter saw smoke coming from the ceiling vent over the choir. The fire department was called. Father Pimen ran to the church, and when he saw the smoke, believed this to be a small fire in the attic which would quickly be extinguished. But such was not the case. The entire attic area, made up completely of 67-year-old timber, was engulfed in flames. Soon the flames shot through the roof. The ceiling collapsed in many areas. The 150 light chandelier purchased from Greece crashed to the floor. The walls buckled out. After hours of firefighting, the parishioners were astonished to find the royal doors, deacons' doors, iconostasis, icons, books, altar, vestments, and sanctuary miraculously intact and not even damaged. The despair of 4 p.m. turned to exultation, thanksgiving, and hope by 6 p.m. A meeting was held in the community center at 7 p.m. that day. The conference was to go on as scheduled. The community center was to be used as a temporary church. A building committee was appointed. By the next day, Fathers Pimen and Theodore, architect Ross Rechtenwald, and Martin Simon, former parish council president and member of the newly appointed building committee, were pacing off distances for how large the renovated or new church should be. Jim and Tim Schaff of Building Systems Incorporated were at the church within minutes of the fire. By week's end, without pay, they had shored up the buckled-out walls. They had built a temporary iconostasis in the community center, and along with Sarge Wassel's Keystone Electric Company, had the church community center looking and feeling like a real church. And on Sunday, July 26, 1986, the Church of the Nativity parishioners worshiped God at their new and beautiful temporary church. By the next week, Ross Rechtenwald was hired as architect to design the new church. Building Systems Incorporated was hired as the general contractor under the system known as fast-tracking, that is, hiring the architect and builder and starting construction before final specifications even are drawn up. On September 6, 1986, the parish approved the plans and cost of the new church. Furthermore, it authorized the building committee and parish council to enter into a mortgage not to exceed $600,000. On September 28, 1986, the service for the founding of the new church was held at the church site, and in early October 1986, construction began. Over the next 10 months, building continued at a rapid pace. Through the hard work of Building Systems employees and parish volunteers, the new church was completed by the next summer. On the afternoon of August 25, 1987, the Holy Table was brought back to the sanctuary, and the first complete services were conducted on the feast of the Dormition of the Mother of God, exactly 68 years to the day that the original Church of the Nativity was opened in 1919. A remarkable event to affect the parish took place with the consecration of Dmitry Alexandrov as the first bishop of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, to be consecrated solely for Old Believers. Father Dmitry was tonsured a monk and took the monastic name of Daniel. He was consecrated as Bishop of Erie and the Old Rite on the Feast of the All-Merciful Savior on August 14th or August 1st by the Julian calendar, 1988. His consecration was an historic event in the history of Russian Orthodox Christianity, as well as the history of this parish. Vladika Daniel's gentle and loving demeanor has made him a beloved shepherd to his flock. Also ordained to the clerical rank of deacon after the repose of Father Akindian Alex in 1988 were Mitrofan Simon, Father Pimen's brother, and Philip Popov. Father Mitrofan was ordained on the Sunday before the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, and Father Philip was ordained on the feast itself. Both Father Deacon Mitrofan and Father Deacon Philip have served faithfully, and with the grace of God will continue to serve as the deacons of the parish for years to come. The rest is history. After so many historic and often traumatic events, the years after the restoration of priesthood and the construction of the new church have been tranquil and blessed. The parish size has remained fairly stable, while church attendance has actually grown. This can be explained by the fact that the services in English, coupled with the presence of a complete cycle of divine services, especially the Divine Liturgy, has led to an enhanced devotion among the parishioners. This phenomenon can also be attributed to the presence of adult converts to the old Orthodox faith, who bring devotion often lying dormant in so-called cradle Orthodox. It is probably accurate to estimate that by the beginning of the 21st century, approximately one-third of the parishioners converted to Orthodox Christianity during adulthood. This has also sealed the end of the Russian ethnicity of the parish, which was eroding even without the presence of non-Russian members. The parish leaders have striven, however, to make sure that the loss of Russian ethnicity does not mean the loss of diligent old Rite Orthodox Christianity. Perhaps as confirmation of this goal, it has been the experience in the parish that each time old believers from Russia and other areas in which old believers have continued to exist visit, they have often commented that they find the level of devotion to the faith to be stronger here than in Russian centers of old believers. Other highlights of our parish history that should be mentioned are the 3 pilgrimages to the Holy Land, sponsored by the parish and made up almost exclusively of parish members. These pilgrimages consisted of approximately 45 to 50 people on each of the 3 occasions in 1981, 1989, and 1993. Each of these pilgrimages to the Holy Land included their own unique qualities. The first included a side trip to Greece. The second included a 2-day excursion into the Sinai Peninsula and St. Catherine's Monastery. On that occasion, the pilgrims will never forget the visitation to this most ancient monastery of Christendom, coupled with the climb of Mount Sinai to the location at which the prophet Moses received the 10 Commandments. Reaching the summit of the mountain just as the sun rose, and then praying a moleben to the prophet Moses, provided an experience of spiritual depth impossible to describe. Finally, the 1993 pilgrimage was combined with a trip to Russia, enabling the pilgrims to visit ancient churches of Russian Christendom as well as the most holy sites of Palestine. Especially interesting in Russia was the visit to the center of the priesthood old believers of the Belokrinitska hierarchy at the Rogoshkaya Kladbishche in Moscow. This also leads to another important development that has occurred in the years since the fall of the Soviet Union: the increased contact with old believers in Russia and the Baltic countries. As mentioned above, the pilgrims in 1993 visited the priesthood center in Moscow, and several of the leaders of that community have visited our parish. Especially gratifying is the new relationship that has begun between our parish and the remarkable Pomortsi community in Riga, known as the Grebenchikhovskaya Obshchina in Riga. This parish of over 10,000 members is clearly the center for priestless old believers in the world. Their well-known nastavnik, Father John Mirolyubov, has visited our parish several times. The last time he visited with the president of the parish council, one of the choir leaders, a second nastavnik, and a number of their young choir members who participated in the summer singing and recreation program led by Father Pimen every June for the youth of our parish. Father Pimen has also visited their parish and was received very cordially by all of the parishioners. He had the opportunity to address the parishioners there and explain our parish history and our restoration of priesthood for priestless old believers. Hopefully these relations with old believers throughout the world will be a continuing part of our parish history. Perhaps one of the brightest moments in recent history occurred on Labor Day weekend in 1994, where the parish celebrated the 75th anniversary with a special moleben and Kresny Chod, that is a procession around the block on which the church is located. A festive dinner at the ballroom of the Bel Air Hotel followed these services. The highlights of this dinner included the presentation of spiritual hymns sung by the youth of the parish, as well as the announcement that the parish had paid off the mortgage of the new church only 8 years after its construction. The end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century has also been a period of acquisition of land surrounding the church property. This acquisition had been undertaken primarily for security and beautification purposes, but may lead to ancillary projects established to further the Christian mission of the parish. In conclusion, It is fair to say that the introduction of English in the services and the restoration of priesthood not only saved the parish from a slow but inevitable death, but also brought the parish to a position of leadership and uniqueness, not only among Old Believer parishes, but among Orthodox parishes worldwide. As confirmation of this claim, we remember the 1986 conference, which brought hundreds of Orthodox Christians into their first contact with the old rite of the Russian Orthodox Church. During those days of the conference, Metropolitan Vitali, first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, served a hierarchical liturgy according to the old rite rubric. He and several other bishops at that time, and others have now, sealed the promises made to Old Believers that they would respect the old rite of the Russian Orthodox Church for Old Believers who accepted the invitation to join them or to be in communion with their church. Among the bishops who have served here in the old rite have been Metropolitan Vitali, Archbishop Loris of Holy Trinity Monastery, Archbishop Anthony of Los Angeles, Archbishop Anthony of San Francisco, Archbishop Hilarion of Australia, and Archbishop Mark of Berlin. Furthermore, scores of new rite priests have served here following the old rite during that conference and in the years that have passed. The uniqueness of the parish and its history have led to opportunities in other areas as well. Several members of the parish choir participated in the Smithsonian Folk Festival, which is held every year on the Mall in Washington, D.C. Our participation was during the 1995 festival in a program called Russian Old Believers, Russian Roots, American Branches. Invited to participate with us was a group of Old Believers from southern Russia. These Old Believers were surprised to learn that our parish had been able to maintain the ancients' nominee chant even while translating the hymns to English. In fact, our translation and publishing projects have led to the distribution of our Old Orthodox prayer book throughout the world, the publication of the complete Lives of the Saints, and such instructional works as the Evangelia Uchitelnoye, the Teaching Gospel, and the Торжественник, festal homilies, that are read during the vigils. The practice of reading the homilies included within them had been almost entirely lost in the rest of Orthodox Christendom. Now many monasteries and parishes have requested copies of the translations we have undertaken. Over the past century, our parish has evolved dramatically while still managing to retain intact the old rite of the Russian Orthodox Church. We hope with God's blessings and guidance, and with the dedication of our parishioners, that this history will someday be seen as only the preface to a story that continues for generations and even centuries to come. But all of that is in God's hands, and we end by thanking Him for preserving and protecting us during this first century of our parish's existence. Glory to Thee, our God, glory to Thee for all things.